While you were arguing about immigration on Twitter, something extraordinary happened. The largest economic shift in a generation, a tectonic plate movement in global manufacturing, a silent revolution that's reshaping how the world makes things. And almost nobody is talking about it. Here's the headline that should have been on every front page in 2023. Mexico surpassed China as America's largest trading partner. For the first time in over 2 decades, the country that shares a 2,000-mile border with the United States sells more to Americans than the factory of the world. Let that sink in. For 20 years, the story of global manufacturing had one main character: China, the Pearl River Delta, Shenzhen, Foxconn, Alibaba, the Made in China label on everything you own. That era isn't ending, but it's cracking. And into that crack, Mexico is pouring concrete. This isn't a temporary blip. This is a structural transformation that will define the next 30 years of global economics, trillions of dollars in investment, millions of jobs. A complete rewiring of how products get from factory floor to your front door. And it's happening right now, in real time, while the world looks elsewhere. This is the story of the silent takeover. 1. The end of the China dream. To understand why Mexico is rising, you first need to understand why China is fading. Not collapsing, fading. There's a difference, and it matters. For 3 decades, the logic of manufacturing in China was irresistible. Wages were low, infrastructure was excellent, the workforce was massive, disciplined, and increasingly skilled. Supply chains clustered together, creating ecosystems where everything you needed to make a product was within a few hours' drive. Western companies couldn't resist. First came the simple stuff: toys, textiles, shoes, then came electronics, then came everything. By 2018, China accounted for nearly 30% of global manufacturing output. The world had never seen concentration like this. But cracks were forming. First, wages. Chinese workers in 2000 earned roughly $150 per month. By 2023, that number had risen to over $1,000 in coastal manufacturing hubs. Still cheap by American standards, but not cheap enough to offset the other costs. Second, demographics. China's working age population peaked around 2015 and has been declining ever since. The one-child policy created a demographic time bomb that's now exploding. By 2050, China will have more retirees than workers. The endless supply of young factory workers is ending. Third, politics. This is the big one. The US-China relationship went from strategic partnership to strategic competition to something that looks increasingly like a Cold War. Tariffs, export controls, sanctions on semiconductors. The message from Washington became clear. Betting your supply chain entirely on China is now a national security risk. And then came COVID. When Shanghai locked down in 2022, the world discovered what supply chain concentration really meant. Factories closed, ports backed up, products didn't ship. Companies that had spent decades optimizing for efficiency suddenly realized they had optimized for fragility. The phones started ringing in boardrooms across America. The question was simple: where else can we make this stuff? The answer, increasingly, was Mexico. 2. The nearshoring revolution. The concept has an unsexy name: nearshoring. It means moving manufacturing closer to the end consumer. In practice, for American companies, it means Mexico. The logic is straightforward. Distance. Shanghai is 7,000 miles from Los Angeles. Monterrey is 500 miles from Dallas. When shipping costs spike and container ships get stuck in canals, that distance matters. Time. A product made in China takes 4 to 6 weeks to reach an American warehouse by sea. A product made in Mexico can arrive by truck in 2 to 3 days. In an era of just-in-time inventory and impatient consumers, that's a massive advantage. Tariffs. Thanks to the USMCA trade agreement, most products made in Mexico enter the United States duty-free. Products made in China face tariffs that can exceed 25%. That's a significant cost advantage that goes straight to the bottom line. Time zones. When your factory is 15 hours ahead, coordination is a nightmare. When your factory is in the same time zone, your engineers can talk to your production line in real time. Problems get solved in hours, not days. These advantages always existed, but for years, they weren't enough to overcome China's ecosystem. The cluster effects were too strong, the suppliers were all there, moving was too complicated. 3 things changed. First, the tariffs Trump imposed in 2018, which Biden largely kept in place. Suddenly, the math shifted. That 25% tariff on Chinese goods was essentially a 25% subsidy for Mexican production. Second, COVID exposed the risks of concentration. Supply chain resilience became a boardroom priority. Diversification was no longer optional. Third, China itself became more expensive and more politically risky. The combination made the leap feasible. The result? An investment tsunami heading south of the border. 3. The numbers don't lie. Let me show you what's actually happening on the ground. Foreign direct investment into Mexico hit record highs in 2023. We're talking over $36 billion announced in new projects. And that's just the official numbers. The real figure, including expansions and supplier investments, is likely much higher. Who's investing? Everyone. Tesla announced a gigafactory in Nuevo Leon that could eventually rival its Shanghai operation. BMW is expanding its San Luis Potosi plant. Foxconn, the company that makes iPhones, is building facilities in Chihuahua. Amazon is constructing massive logistics centers throughout northern Mexico. But it's not just the household names, it's the entire supply chain. When a Tesla factory opens, it doesn't operate in isolation. It needs battery suppliers, motor manufacturers, wiring harness producers, seat makers. Each of those suppliers needs their own suppliers. The ecosystem effect that made China dominant is now replicating in Mexico. The state of Nuevo Leon alone has attracted over $8 billion in announced investments since 2022. Monterrey, its capital, is transforming from a regional industrial city into something that looks increasingly like a North American Shenzhen. And here's the number that should make everyone pay attention. Mexico's manufacturing exports to the United States grew by over 25% between 2019 and 2023. That's not gradual growth. That's a hockey stick. 4. The infrastructure miracle that nobody built. Now, here's where the story gets complicated. Because Mexico's rise isn't just about economics, it's about geography, history, and a stroke of luck. Mexico has something China can never have, a 2,000-mile land border with the richest consumer market in human history. No ocean shipping required, no port congestion, no 3-week delays. You make something in Monterrey on Monday, and it's on a shelf in Houston by Wednesday. The infrastructure to support this has been building for decades, largely unnoticed. NAFTA, signed in 1994, didn't just eliminate tariffs, it created an integrated North American manufacturing system. Auto parts cross the border multiple times during production. A transmission might be forged in Ohio, machined in Saltillo, assembled in Detroit, and installed in a car sold in Toronto. This integration built roads, bridges, rail lines, and logistics networks that now serve as the backbone for nearshoring. Mexico didn't need to build new infrastructure from scratch. It already had 30 years of integration with the American economy. The maquiladora system, border factories that import components and export finished goods, has existed since the 1960s. The workforce knows manufacturing, the managers know American business culture, the lawyers know both legal systems. This is Mexico's hidden advantage, institutional knowledge. When a company moves production from China to Mexico, they're not starting from zero. They're plugging into a system that's been refined over decades. 5. The workforce advantage. Let's talk about people. Because ultimately, manufacturing is about humans making things. Mexico has 130 million people. Over half are under 35. The demographic pyramid is almost the exact opposite of China's: young, growing, and hungry. But it's not just quantity, it's quality. Mexico produces over 130,000 engineering graduates per year. These aren't theoretical academics. Mexican technical universities have tight relationships with industry. Students do internships at real factories. They graduate knowing how to actually make things. The automotive sector alone employs over 1 million Mexicans directly, with millions more in supporting industries. These workers have skills that take years to develop: precision welding, CNC machining, quality control, lean manufacturing. And here's a crucial point. Mexican wages are roughly 1/3 of Chinese wages in comparable manufacturing jobs. That gap didn't exist 15 years ago. Chinese wages rose while Mexican wages stayed relatively stable. The cost advantage has quietly shifted. There's also the cultural factor, often overlooked. Mexico and the United States share more than a border. They share time zones, cultural references, and increasingly, family ties. Over 36 million Americans are of Mexican origin. Business relationships form more naturally. Communication is easier. Trust builds faster. When an American CEO visits a factory in Monterey, they don't feel like they're in a foreign country. They feel like they're in a different state. That psychological proximity matters more than people admit. 6. The China plus one strategy. Now, let's be clear about something. Mexico isn't replacing China entirely. Nobody is. China still produces over 28% of global manufactured goods. It has ecosystems in electronics, batteries, and advanced manufacturing that will take decades to replicate elsewhere, if they ever can be. The supply chains are too deep, too complex, too integrated. What's happening instead is China plus one. Companies are keeping their Chinese operations while adding capacity elsewhere. Mexico is becoming the plus one for an enormous range of products. This is actually more sustainable than a complete decoupling. Companies get the best of both worlds. Chinese efficiency for complex electronics and global markets, Mexican proximity for North American consumption. But here's what's interesting. The plus one is growing faster than the China part. As new investments flow to Mexico, the ecosystem effects compound. More suppliers attract more manufacturers. More manufacturers attract more suppliers. The snowball is rolling downhill, gathering mass. Some analysts project that Mexico could capture up to $150 billion in manufacturing investment over the next decade, primarily redirected from China. That would transform not just northern Mexico, but the entire country's economic trajectory. 7. The problems nobody wants to talk about. Time for the hard part. Because Mexico's rise isn't guaranteed, there are real obstacles that could derail everything. First, energy. Mexican manufacturing runs on electricity, and Mexico has an electricity problem. The state power company, CFE, is inefficient and underfunded. Blackouts happen, rates are rising. The current government has been hostile to private renewable energy investment, exactly the wrong approach when companies are increasingly demanding green manufacturing. Companies like Tesla don't just want cheap power, they want clean power. They want to claim their products are made with renewable energy. Mexico's energy policy is actively working against this demand. Second, water. Northern Mexico, where most nearshoring investment is concentrating, is running out of water. Nuevo Leon faced a severe drought in 2022 that had residents lining up at tanker trucks. Manufacturing needs water, lots of it. This is a constraint that won't disappear. Third, security. Let's address the elephant in the room. Parts of Mexico have serious organized crime problems. Violence, extortion, cartel control of certain territories. Now, the manufacturing zones in the north are generally safer than the headlines suggest. Monterrey is not Sinaloa, but perception matters. Every executive considering a Mexican investment has to answer questions from their board about safety. Every story about violence makes that conversation harder. Fourth, infrastructure gaps. Yes, the border region has good infrastructure, but move south and the picture changes. Roads deteriorate, rail capacity is limited. The ports on both coasts are congested and inefficient. Mexico needs massive infrastructure investment to fully capture the nearshoring opportunity. Fifth, politics. Mexico's current government has sent mixed signals to investors. On one hand, they welcome manufacturing. On the other hand, they've canceled major airport projects, fought with private energy companies, and created regulatory uncertainty. Investment requires predictability. Mexico's political environment doesn't always provide it. 8. The race against time. Here's the thing about this opportunity. It has an expiration date. The forces pushing manufacturing out of China won't last forever. Tariffs could be negotiated away. Tensions could ease. Companies could decide that Chinese efficiency is worth the political risk. Mexico has a window, maybe 10 to 15 years, to capture enough investment that the ecosystem becomes self-sustaining, to reach critical mass, to become so embedded in North American supply chains that leaving becomes harder than staying. The country is moving fast, but is it moving fast enough? The energy problems need solutions. The water crisis needs management. The security situation needs improvement. The infrastructure gaps need filling. These aren't impossible challenges, but they require coordinated action. They require investment. They require political will. Other countries see the same opportunity. Vietnam is aggressively courting manufacturing. India is pushing its Make in India initiative. Indonesia is building industrial parks. Morocco is positioning itself as the nearshoring option for Europe. Mexico has advantages these countries don't: the border, the trade agreement, the existing integration, but advantages can be squandered. 9. The geopolitical chessboard. Zoom out for a moment. What does Mexico's manufacturing rise mean for the bigger picture? For the United States, it's a strategic opportunity. Reducing dependence on Chinese manufacturing addresses both economic and national security concerns. A prosperous Mexico means fewer reasons for migration. Integrated supply chains create shared interests that strengthen the bilateral relationship. For China, it's a challenge but not a catastrophe. Chinese companies are themselves investing in Mexican factories, using Mexico as a backdoor to the American market. Chinese-owned plants in Mexico can export to the US tariff-free. The shift isn't entirely zero-sum. For Mexico, it's the biggest opportunity since NAFTA. Maybe bigger. The chance to move from a middle-income trap into genuine developed nation status. To create millions of high-quality manufacturing jobs. To build an industrial base that can weather commodity price swings and economic cycles. But opportunity is not destiny. Mexico has had opportunities before and failed to capitalize on them. The oil boom of the 1970s ended in debt crisis. NAFTA brought growth but also inequality. Whether this moment is different depends on choices made in the next decade. 10. The silent takeover. Here's what strikes me most about this story: how little attention it receives. Cable news is obsessed with the border, but only in the context of migration and drugs. The idea that the same border is becoming the most important manufacturing corridor in the Western Hemisphere barely registers. Political debates about Mexico focus on cartels and asylum seekers. The fact that American jobs increasingly depend on Mexican factories gets ignored. Business coverage mentions nearshoring occasionally, but rarely captures the scale. This isn't a trend, it's a transformation. Perhaps the silence is because the change is gradual. No single announcement captures the shift. No dramatic moment creates a news hook. It's thousands of decisions by thousands of companies, each one unremarkable, collectively reshaping the global economy. Or perhaps it's because the story doesn't fit neat political narratives. It's not about America winning or China losing. It's about economic geography evolving in response to changing circumstances. Complicated, nuanced, hard to tweet. But the silence doesn't change the reality. Every day, more factories break ground in Monterrey and Saltillo and Tijuana. Every day, more trucks cross the border carrying goods that used to come from Shanghai. Every day, the silent takeover continues. Conclusion: the future is being built. 20 years from now, when historians write about the economic shifts of the 2022, Mexico's manufacturing revolution will be a central chapter. They'll write about how geopolitical tensions and pandemic disruptions combined to break China's manufacturing dominance, how North America responded by integrating more deeply, how Mexico transformed from an emerging market into a manufacturing powerhouse. Or maybe they'll write about a missed opportunity, how Mexico had the chance of a century and fumbled it through energy policy failures, water shortages, and political instability. How the nearshoring wave moved to Vietnam or India instead. The story isn't written yet. It's being written right now, in factory floors and boardrooms and government offices, in every investment decision and infrastructure project and policy choice. What is clear is that something fundamental is changing. The Made in China era isn't over, but it's entering a new phase. The Made in Mexico era has begun. And you're watching it happen in real time, whether you realize it or not. The next time you buy a car, check where it was made. Increasingly, the answer will be Mexico. The next time you hear about supply chain shifts, know that trillions of dollars are moving. The next time someone talks about the border, remember that it's not just a line on a map. It's the most important economic frontier in the world right now. And almost nobody noticed. If this analysis opened your eyes to something new, hit that subscribe button, because the Mexico story is just beginning. The winners and losers of this transformation are being decided right now. And I'll be here to break it all down. See you in the comments. And remember, economics isn't just about money. It's about geography, timing, and the quiet revolutions that reshape the world while everyone's looking elsewhere.